The views and opinions expressed in this video are those of the speakers and panelists, and do not necessarily reflect the position of the ETHOS Institute for Public Christianity and its founding institutions and organizations.
There's limited job mobility. Work permit holders in Singapore are not allowed to freely change employers. There have been some slight tweaks again on a case-by-case basis. Source country restrictions, the Singapore government decides which nationality can work in which sector. So if you are a worker from China, you can work in the service sector, in the manufacturing sector, in the construction sector, service sector. If you are Bangladeshi, you can work in the construction sector, in the marine sector, but not the manufacturing sector, and not in the service sector, unless your cleaning company has a town council contract. Now I have searched high and low, trying to find some kind of public explanation for this policy direction, but I have not been able to. So the state also imposes certain responsibility on employers of work permit holders. Employers who hire a non-Malaysian work permit holder has to furnish a $5,000 security bond. This bond may be forfeited by the government if the migrant worker goes missing or violates terms of the work permit, and this incentivizes draconian control measures by employers, such as withholding of passports or hiring repatriation companies to send them back home. Foreign worker levy. So the government imposes a tax on employers of migrant workers. They have to pay the government $300 to $950 per month per construction worker. So it ranges per sector, right? So in the construction industry, that's the amount, and that's higher than the salaries of most of the Bangladeshi construction workers that we see. There are also quotas that determine how many migrant workers they can hire. The last pass I'm going to talk about is the special pass. Okay, so the special pass is when you are a work permit holder, you go to MOM, you file a salary or injury claim. MOM decides you have a valid claim, your employer cancels your work permit as they often do. MOM will issue you a special pass that gives you the legal right to stay in Singapore, but again, you are not allowed to work during this period, and so you have no income and very limited social support. Again, MOM has tweaked the policy such that they do allow certain workers to work on a special pass, but it's again on a case-by-case basis. So if you can see from this table, some people have described our work pass system as one that is highly utilitarian and elitist. So the different privileges and restrictions that you get as a foreigner on a work pass depending on your income and your qualifications and how the state views you. Okay, so that is to contextualize what the work pass system is. Now I'm actually going to go into the conditions of migrant workers in Singapore. I might have to breeze through it quite quickly. Okay, so recruitment fees. Bangladeshi migrant workers appear to pay the highest fees. TWC2, which is an NGO, that migrant rights NGO, they did a survey which they released in 2017 that found that from 2015, Bangladeshi migrant workers, first-time construction workers, were paying agency fees upwards of $15,000. That is worth 3 to 4 years of their wages, right? This is compounded by chronic wage stagnation. The daily pay rate of Bangladeshi construction workers in 1990 was $16 to $19 a day. It is now 2017 and they are still being paid $16 to $19 a day. So if you consider inflation, they probably are earning less now than they did before. So this indebtedness binds workers to degrading working conditions. If you have sold your land, if you have mortgaged your land, your family has sold assets, and you've borrowed money at cutthroat rates from moneylenders, you will do what you can to keep your job, even if the conditions are different from what you're promised, even if the conditions keep deteriorating, because going back means serious financial pain. Compounding the problem is also kickbacks. So some Bangladeshi workers, they pay this huge amount of money. 1 or 2 years later, when their work permits are about to expire, they are asked for more money to keep their jobs. Okay, so So wage theft is also very common. Wage theft is something that we define as the multiple ways migrant workers do not receive the wages they are legally and contractually due. So Home published a paper on wage theft among migrant workers in January this year. It's actually available on the website, but the website is down at the moment. So if you want a copy, just email me and I'll send you a copy, okay? So I'm going to just quickly go through this. Very common forms of wage theft: non-payment and underpayment of wages. Very few workers we see at the NGOs are actually paid overtime rates according to labour laws. Unauthorised wage deductions, which functions as a disciplining mechanism. Wage manipulation. 90% of the Chinese construction workers home saw were not sure how their salaries were calculated. So this creates huge problems when they actually file a salary claim at MOM. Okay, so wage exploitation. We do not have a minimum wage in Singapore. Therefore, it is not illegal to pay $1 an hour, $2 an hour, $2.50 an hour. So in last year, the N Foundation released a report that revealed that foreign healthcare assistants in nursing homes in Singapore were getting paid as starting salaries as low as $350 a month. And I'm pretty sure that they probably have to pay some recruitment fees as well. Migrant cleaners in commercial buildings, $500 basic salaries. Bangladeshi cleaners in HDB estates, $300 to $400 basic wages a month. Wage discrimination. Different nationalities of workers are paid different pay rates for no apparent reason. Well, that's probably a reason, but I can't say it. So Chinese construction workers are paid double Bangladeshi workers. Bangladeshi cleaners are paid $300 to $400 in basic salaries. But the government has recently set a progressive wage model where local cleaners are to be paid at least $1,000 a month. Now, we do not object to this, right? The salaries of cleaners are low, and they have to watch that and do something about it. But what is problematic is that this model excludes Bangladeshi workers. So they are working double the hours of local cleaners, doing the more strenuous work, not having any rest days, but they're only paid half of what the local cleaners are paid. So unequal pay for equal work is normalized and institutionalized in Singapore. So other issues: deceptive recruitment, being promised certain wages and conditions in your home country and arriving here to find out that things have changed. Contract substitution: you sign one contract there and you come here and you have another contract. Failure to comply with labour court orders, right? So in the famous words of a dear friend, in certain cases, even if you win, you lose. You win a judgment order in your favour, your employer ignores it, nothing you can do. Okay, long working hours and lack of rest days. So this is a time card of a migrant worker building the Marina Bay Sands casino. So it was pretty similar conditions as well for the other casinos. So you can see that he worked every single day. There's 26-hour shifts, so no rest days and very, very, very long working hours. So hazardous working conditions. Construction sites are the deadliest work sites in Singapore. The fatality rate in construction is 3 times higher than the overall fatality rate. On average, 2/3 of the workers who have died in fatal workplace accidents are foreigners. Okay, so food, housing, and medical care. So Bangladeshi workers who have to pay for catered food complain regularly about this. The food is stale, it is rotten, the roti is hard, the dal is like water. But if they are housed in places that don't allow them to cook, they have no choice but to pay $130 every month out of their already small salaries and eat this disgusting food that makes them sick. Housing conditions. Okay, so I think I have not met a single migrant worker who did not have an intimate relationship with rodents. Okay, cockroaches, rats, bedbugs. More than 80% of the Chinese construction workers that we have interviewed for another survey that's coming out said that they had problems with bedbugs. So a lot of migrant workers expressed shock that they come to Singapore, which is this really wealthy, rich city, and they build such swanky buildings, but then they are housed basically in SHITHOLES. So protection, representation, and access to justice. So there's no social protection from sudden termination and repatriation. So as you can see from the code about social loads, the fact that migrant workers are not given social protections is seen as a benefit for the state, right? They're treated as externalities, this additional care work that needs to be given to people at different life stages. Restrictions on migrant worker representation. So migrant workers in Singapore are allowed to join trade unions, but they are not allowed to serve as branch officers without permission from the authorities. Certain trade unions have also signed contracts with certain large companies that exclude migrant workers from negotiations over wages and working conditions. So there are also a lot of problems with access to justice, the problems that workers face when they file claims. So Home and TWC2 released a report called Justice Delayed, Justice Denied. TWC2 will also be launching a very comprehensive report that evaluates the salary and injury claim system in June. So you can look out for that as well. Okay, so I'm almost done with this section. So I didn't actually write about domestic workers in the booklet, primarily because most of my research so far over the last couple of years has been on male migrant workers. But I wanted to include this because, first of all, I've started doing research on domestic workers recently. Secondly, I think it's very easy sometimes to distance ourselves from the problems of migrant workers that we don't interact with on a daily basis. So we can think, oh, okay, construction workers, it's really terrible what's happening to them, but I don't own a construction company. This is something that the construction industry has to deal with. But when it comes to domestic workers, it hits a lot closer to home. It's a bit more complicated. There are family relations involved. And also, if you consider the demographic of the Christian community in Singapore, mostly middle class and Chinese, 1 in 5 households in Singapore hire domestic workers, and I would say that a significant number of those would be Christian households, so we are familiar with domestic workers. We live in homes that hire domestic workers, or we visit homes regularly where domestic workers are hired. So what are the problems that they face? Very similar in terms of the theme, but they manifest in different ways. So the recruitment system for domestic workers is different. They don't pay upfront loans. They tend to come to Singapore and then their salaries are deducted for a number of months. So the Employment Agencies Act actually stipulates that you're not allowed to deduct more than 2 months of a worker's salary for a 2-year contract, but this rarely happens. So most of the time, domestic workers find their salaries being deducted for 4, 5, 6, 7, even 8 months. Wage theft and exploitation, so wage deductions, withholding of salaries for a long time, working conditions. So we've been organizing focus groups recently with domestic workers, and lack of rest days is still a huge problem, especially for those who are here for the first time. Long working hours, so in the focus group, a lot of domestic workers talked about how 18-hour days were quite common. They wake up at 5, they go to bed at 11, sometimes 12. And surveillance, CCTV cameras all throughout the house. In the bedroom, outside the toilet, facing the fridge, over the stove, right? Restrictions on communication. So it's 2017, and there's still quite a disturbing number of domestic workers who are not allowed to own mobile phones, which makes it extremely difficult for them to keep in touch with their family and their friends. So basic needs insecurity. So food deprivation was a theme that was recurring a lot in our focus groups, and it's really shocking, especially in a country like Singapore where we consider ourselves foodies and there's so much food wastage. So domestic workers would say that they would have to drink water throughout the day to stave off their hunger pangs. They are not allowed to eat anything except instant noodles with no eggs, no meat, only vegetable, sometimes no vegetables, not allowed to eat any fruit. 2 slices of bread a day because the imam will count the slices of bread every day to make sure that she eat more than 2. Housing, being housed in cramped and poorly ventilated living spaces, not being allowed to see the doctor or not being allowed to rest when they see the doctor. So issues of social protection and worker representation are very similar. We do not have unions that represent domestic workers or are fronted by domestic workers, right? And access to justice, so domestic workers see the system as punitive. They file a complaint, maybe for a salary claim, and then they have to stay back for months for this investigations to go on. They are not allowed to work. They don't have any money. Meanwhile, the employer just kind of goes on with life as per normal. Okay, so normalization and dehumanization. So I use this term normalization a lot because throughout my research, that's one of the things that I've found most troubling. So it's not just that exploitation exists, and I'm reminded constantly that exploitation is everywhere. It's not just Singapore. Yes, I know that it happens in countries that you would say are liberal, have strict labor laws. But what really troubles me in Singapore is this high level of institutional and social acceptance for exploitative practices that requires some level of dehumanization, right? So that we can collectively disregard or obscure how these conditions would be unacceptable if it was happening to us or to people that we love and care for, but it's okay for some other group that we seem to have othered, right? So some of the things that were coming out in our focus groups with domestic workers that I found quite troubling. So humiliation. So domestic workers would tell us that they have to hide food and eat in the toilet, right? Because otherwise they don't have enough food. So one domestic worker told us that she had to hide food in a garbage bag, pretend she was going to throw the rubbish, eat in the toilet secretly, and then if she gets caught, she'll get a scolding. Can you imagine how humiliating? So another domestic worker said that when the family wants to give her clothes to wash, they don't hand her the clothes with their hands. They kind of clip the clothes with their toes and then they just fling it at her every day, right? Emotional abuse. So you effing stupid idiot every day, they get called that, right? Or this. Slamming doors, slamming things, just kind of like using domestic workers as this kind of punching bag for a stressful life. Invisibility. So instead of saying, oh, you know, Javon, can you help take a photo of me? They'll go, oi, hey, you. You know, so every day, so the domestic worker was the one that raised it herself. She says we're invisible. They don't even call us by our names. They just go, oi, every day, you know. And commodification. So in 2011, this really bizarre thing happened, right? So the Competition Commission, and if that name sounds familiar, they are the ones that recently released this report on milk powder and why it's so expensive. So in 2011, they fined 16 employment agencies because they tried to increase the wages of Indonesian domestic workers. Because Indonesian domestic workers were avoiding Singapore and going to other destinations, and the agency said, well, you know why? It's not economically feasible for them to come here, the salaries are too low. So the Competition Commission actually fined the employment agencies because they had a meeting about this. So Home actually wrote a letter to the newspapers because we were trying to say that domestic workers are not commodities. You cannot compare it to price fixing like they are petrol or gold or coffee. But they fined the employment agencies, and so they did not increase their wages. So you can also see it when you go to employment agencies and they ask you, do you want a fresh maid, right? Discrimination. So I think some of you may have read that there are certain condominiums that still restrict or bar or ban domestic workers from using shared facilities like the swimming pools and the gyms. Okay, so the rant is over. So this was actually the most difficult part of the booklet for me to write. So, you know, doing research on the front bits was rewarding, it was interesting. And then, of course, writing about what's happening to migrant workers is something I've been doing for many years. But then came this bit, right? So I've sketched this kind of aspirational vision of what labor justice is. Then I nosedived into a reality check by talking about what's actually happening here, and then what next, right? So usually when you write an NGO report, you end with recommendations, but I have no recommendations here, right? So, but I do feel that it would be impossible to talk about faith and social justice in Singapore without talking about what happened in 1987. So to do this, I am going to refer to the booklet because I didn't put it on the slides. Yeah, so on Sunday, the 21st of May, marked 30 years since Operation Spectrum, and some of you in the room might be familiar, some maybe less so. So what happened was 22 Singaporeans were detained without trial under the Internal Security Act. They were accused by the Singapore government of being Marxist conspirators planning to overthrow the government and establish a communist state. 10 of the persons arrested were actively involved in social work with the Catholic Church. The detainees were never charged with a criminal offence, nor did they undergo a public trial. The detainees allegedly were subject to long interrogations under extreme physical conditions, threats of being detained indefinitely, of physical abuse, and of extractions of false confessions under duress. 4 Catholic priests were also censured. They were suspended from their position. Within weeks of the arrest, the Catholic Church's Justice and Peace Commission was discontinued. The Catholic Centre for Foreign Workers was shut down. There were official warnings by politicians, including then PM Lee Kuan Yew, for the religious-minded to not cross the line into social action, and that religion and politics must not mix. So Operation Spectrum has been marked as a turning point in which Singaporeans were tuned to out-of-bound markers, or what's known as OB markers, where strict boundaries were established between the church and the state, and by implication, other religious institutions. The government passed in 1990 the Maintenance of Religious Harmony Act, in which a restraining order could be issued by the Ministry of Home Affairs if the minister believes a person, whether religious authority or lay person, has committed or is attempting to commit any of the following acts: causing feelings of hatred, ill will between different religious groups, carrying out activities to promote a political cause under the guise of practicing a religious belief, carrying out subversive activities under the guise of practicing any religious belief, exciting disaffection against the president or the government under the guise of practicing any religious belief. A breach of this restraining order is considered a criminal offence, and a penalty upon conviction is a fine not exceeding $10,000 or 2 years in jail. Could be both. Additionally, the proceedings are secret. Judicial reviews are not allowed for orders and decisions made under the MRHA. So I think that the events of 1987 have really caused a chilling effect. And on Sunday, there was an event at the projector where I was, and they actually launched a book with accounts by the detainees. And I'm going to read you a passage by Father Patrick Goh, who was at the time working with Jurong Industrial Estate workers. So Patrick Goh says, "The year 1987 is a blot in the annals of the church and state in Singapore. It made many people cynical of the government and resulted in a great loss of respect for the august institution of the Roman Catholic Church. As the church bled, many were disappointed. Father Joseph, who died of a broken heart, Father Aro and Edgar de Souza left Singapore immediately, having to give up the work and people they loved so much. I continue to bleed just as Singapore bleeds. The ghost of 87 hangs over the church and beyond." So I think it's definitely true that the ghost of 87 hangs over us. And when I think of what happened, and then I look around and I see this strong public preference for charity over activism, even though the two are intimately intertwined, I can see how it is a strategic and politically rational choice, but it is also a very morally troubling one. Okay, so my concluding remarks. So, justice is a constitutive dimension of the preaching of the gospel. Vincent Ching, in his book, has also said justice is not a choice, it is an obligation. Justice concerns are not exclusive to any one faith, neither are they inherent inclinations of the faithful. Justice features prominently in the Bible. Christian social teachings on justice, poverty, and oppression illuminate the moral dimension of human rights and international labor standards. They reveal a faith that is alive to the suffering and hardships of others. It is coherent with other major spiritual and religious traditions, and it demonstrates a viable path for solidarity and cooperation between and among not just faith-based communities, but also secular groups in pluralistic societies. And that, to me, is vital, because my faith is personal, but justice work is political. It demands solidarity and the building of alliances. And I think on that note, I'm going to end. Thank you for listening.